Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this presentation on the findings of the Beyond Barriers research project. Please, Melody, you can move to the next slide. So yeah, just a quick overview of our session today. I'll first do a quick introduction on the actual project. We'll go through our key findings. We have our research partners to give some insights from each of the contexts. We'll just explain a bit about the tools that we have developed for the project. And finally, we will have some space for questions and answers at the end. Next slide, please. So first, for some introductions, I will start with myself. My name is Mark Johnson from Concern Worldwide. I'm based in our headquarters in Dublin, and I've been leading this research on behalf of Concern Worldwide. And I'll pass over to my colleague, Ariana.
Thanks so much, Mark. My name is Ariana Marnicio. I work with the Concern US team and really happy to be here with you. Just to let you know about the Q&A, we will be receiving your questions throughout the course of the webinar. Please feel free to share, and we'll get to answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mala.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. This is Mahfuza Mala. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm academic research for this particular project with Concern Worldwide. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, everyone. This is Yusuf Al-Mustafa, Syrian based in Gaziantep, worked for different organizations in Syria. And I am founder of Trust Consultancy, where we were responsible for the research in northwest of Syria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Herbert Mwarukomo. I'm from Malawi Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy, and I'm the research partner leading the research team in Malawi in partnership with Concern Worldwide. Over to Noradin.
Thanks, Herbert. Hi, everyone. My name is Noradin Noor. I work in Access Consulting in Somalia, and we were the consulting firm with Concern Worldwide for this project.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melody Way. I'm a senior program officer with Concern Worldwide. And back to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks all. And just to let you know that unfortunately our partner Gang Karume from DRC couldn't join today. But also just to inform everyone that there is French interpretation. If you want to go to the bottom of your screen where there's the globe, there is French interpretation available there. So on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the Beyond Barrier Research is a project funded by BHA and led by Concern Worldwide. And the aim of it was to gain a better understanding of the lack of progress that's been made on the commitments to the grant bargain, which was made in 2016. The project had two primary questions, which were: what are the barriers to localization under the themes of funding, human resources, and power and partnership? And what are the practical solutions to overcoming these barriers? As mentioned, we conducted the research in 5 contexts, and we selected these on the basis of various criteria, attempting to get a diverse range of contexts. And we took into account factors such as geography, types of crisis, scale of humanitarian responses, and perceived progress on localization. We used the same methodology in each country. Firstly, we organized a stakeholder workshop where we invited representatives from local NGOs, INGOs, and UN agencies. This was followed by a series of key informant interviews with a variety of stakeholders. And just to say that most of the interviews that we did conduct were with local and national NGOs. And to say now that we use the term local and national NGOs in our report as a way to describe NGOs that originate from the context in question. However, we recognize that there is a broad diversity of organizations who often have very different challenges. And if you read our report, we do go into that in some detail. But we use that term as a kind of a catch-all to refer to those organizations. Finally, there was a community component, which we conducted focus group discussions and key informant interviews with members of crisis-affected communities who had experience of humanitarian aid within the last year. Next slide, please. So after those visits to the country context, we also conducted a global localization survey. And this was designed to test hypotheses generated during the qualitative research phase in the 5 contexts and provide quantitative evidence. This was launched in January 2024, and we collected opinions and experience of over 811 respondents from 60 different countries. And again, the results of this survey are on the website. Next slide, please. So with the introduction done, we can move on to the main part of the presentation. In our finding report, we have listed 8 key findings from the research. And in doing so, we are reflecting the perspectives of the diverse range of research participants as best we can. And we should note that these are the perspectives of the research participants, not necessarily of Concern Worldwide, our partners, or BHA. Overall, we found that while progress has been made on certain issues, it's not been sufficient to move the dial towards a more locally led response. The themes of our findings will be familiar to many, especially to those who work in partnership and localization. However, we believe that this highlights that more of the same will not produce better results. To achieve real progress, there will need to be a real transformative approach, which will challenge the way many are used to working. However, we do think that the research does provide new perspectives on these issues, and we have developed case studies from the research context, which we believe highlight innovative approaches. And lastly, the aim of the research was to develop actionable solutions, and we have developed tools, and I will come back to them towards the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So the first, and in my personal view, the most important finding that we got from this research was the lack of trust being at the root of most, if not all, barriers that we came across. There's a lack of trust between all stakeholders in the humanitarian system, and this is impeding progress and localization. This has many effects, and it leads to increased risk aversion, reduced coordination, undermining of capacities. It inhibits innovation, and it decreases effectiveness. However, despite the prevalence of these issues related to trust, we found very little evidence of any actors tangibly addressing the issues. Next slide, please. So we tried to really focus on this issue during the research, and we adapted a research project, from the business psychology world on trust in teams, and that identifies different categories of trust that build or damage trust. And we had several sessions during our workshops on this, and ultimately we developed 4 categories of trust that we find, and from the experiences of the participants, are fundamental to building trust in partnership in our sector. And the key message from this finding is that trust is a fundamental competency for success in partnerships and must be prioritized and measured. And we have developed a tool on this, and I'm going to return back to that towards the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So the next finding concerns what we found are 2 dimensions to localization that need to be separated apart. The first is the system. That means the shifting of power and resources to local actors. The second being the response actually being locally led, and where those affected by crisis are in control and make the decisions on the response. In all 5 of the contexts of the research, we found that the communities were not happy with their ability to influence the aid they receive, and this was irrespective of whether they received it from an international or local actor. We also did not find any evidence that by achieving the first part, i.e. by getting resources to local actors, that this will actually lead to the second part, i.e. that the response will be affected by communities. And lastly, we found that there was an overemphasis on the first dimension, and that there's a need for an increased attention to ensuring the objectives of the second dimension are prioritized. So this leads to what is the end goal with localization? Because during the course of our research, most of the stakeholder groups referred to shifting resources to local and national NGOs, and much less to empowering communities. Next slide, please. So the third finding very much links to the last finding. because it's clear that localization needs to be tracked and progress measured in a more nuanced way. It's a complex issue which merits a multifaceted approach. Our research found that there's an overemphasis on the 25% direct funding targeted from the grant bargain. Not only has this not been reached, it is not likely to ever be reached in the current system. Furthermore, we observed several unintended negative consequences of this target. The first of these consequences are it contributes to an oligopoly of large national NGOs, meaning that the tendency for donors and other international actors is to provide a small number of grants to a small group of actors, and that this is creating a group of large national NGOs capable of handling large grants, but they're becoming a new power layer beneath the INGOs. And again, linking back to the previous finding, what is this really the end goal of what's trying to be achieved? The quantitative metrics also ignore the previously mentioned second dimension, i.e. local leadership. It ignores the impact of empowering through models such as consortia, and it also encourages short-term, quick fix thinking when really deeper changes are what are required. So the Beyond Barriers research team, we've developed a tool to track the quantity, quality, and local leadership of humanitarian funding. And again, I will return to this at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. The fourth finding concerns the role of INGOs and UN agencies in partnership and beyond partnership. So firstly, the principles of equitable partnership are well established and should be the aim of all international actors. The research found that there is progress on this, and the graph illustrates findings from the global survey where local and national NGOs were asked to rank their partners' performance on certain issues, and INGOs were asked to rank their own performance on the same issues. The data shows that while local and national NGOs acknowledge the good partnership practices from their international partners, there's still a gap between this and what INGOs perceive of themselves. Next slide, please. However, the research partners made it clear that it is not sufficient for international actors to remain as partners in the traditional sense forever. The Humanitarian Advisory Group have developed this model that's on the screen, which illustrates the 3 stages of partnership. And we found many examples of the first two, the norming and enabling stages, where international actors were acting as good partners in that sense. However, the third and final phase, the adjourning phase, is what we didn't find much evidence of and seems to remain a challenge for most international actors to get to. So finally, what we believe from the research tells us is that partnership is a modality and not the endpoint. What is really required is for INGOs to be, and UN agencies, to be intentional about shifting power when they enter into partnerships. Partnership should be viewed as a journey where the endpoint is that the local partner will be capable of taking control and that the INGO role will change and act as a technical support, ally, or perhaps phase out completely. Next slide, please. So the issue of risk was a major point of contention between the international and local and national actors throughout the research in each of the contexts. And there's several aspects to this. Firstly, there are different perspectives on risk and which ones are the most important. The diagram that's on the screen shows the various types of risks that are mentioned when we talk about this in our sector, and it comes from a research done by IASC a number of years ago. However, the local and national NGOs that we spoke to tended to focus on risks concerning safety, security, and operational issues, whereas the international actors tended to focus on fiduciary and legal compliance risks. So the different perspectives of the risk also affect the consequences and of what happens when a risk event occurs. Next slide, please. So what we found is when a fraudulent event occurs, many international actors maintain that they bear 100% of the risk, being grant holder to the donor, or indeed the donor themselves. Whereas the local and national NGOs accept that this may be the case, but the consequences for them are always more severe. Having their funding can be existential for them and may lead to them being blacklisted. These are not issues that are faced by international actors. So in terms of the solution being put forward is risk sharing. And this requires donor, international actor, and local national NGO to come together to assess the risks that exist, how they can be mitigated against, and how they can share the burden. The basic premise is that the humanitarian sector, or in the humanitarian sector, a risk transferred is not a risk dealt with. As all stakeholders are working towards a shared objective, there needs to be a way to work together to eliminate risks. However, to make progress on this, it will require increased risk tolerance from international actors, especially donors, which from the interviews that we conducted during the research seems a remote possibility. Next slide, please. So the next one is around pool funds, and in 3 of the contexts that we did the research in, there were UN-managed country-based pool funds. And there's no doubt that these mechanisms are successful in getting funds directly to local national NGOs. However, we found that the significance attached to them is way out of line when you consider how much funding they receive. The chart there shows the percentage of funding of humanitarian funding going to various actors, and you can see that the country-based pool funds in 2023 received 3.25%. In comparison to some of the other UN agencies. So while these mechanisms can act as a catalyst, there needs to be more commitment to localization than simply funding pool funds. So indeed, certain pool fund representatives that we interviewed expressed frustration over the expectations being put on them regarding localization, especially compared to the other UN agencies who are receiving multiples of funding. Next slide, please. So while pool fund mechanisms have successfully channeled direct funding to local and national NGOs, they do favour larger local national NGOs who can meet the eligibility and compliance requirements. The chart there shows that the data from our global survey shows that the NGOs with large budgets are far more likely to receive pool funds than smaller ones, which links back to our previous finding on current efforts favouring larger local and national NGOs. So, and then the other thing to note is that there's further work to be done, not just on the levels of funding, but also on issues regarding transparency and the influence that local actors have on pool funds. And finally, on pool funds, just to highlight that there are alternatives that we found throughout the course of the research, such as START Fund and the Near Syria Solidarity Fund. And we have case studies on them developed on the website. Next slide, please. So the issue of capacity or the perceived low capacity of local national NGOs was perhaps the area of the research where progress remained stuck. Capacity was the most commonly discussed issue during the research, where international actors in general perceive that local and national NGOs have low capacity, and the local national NGOs complain and are not happy about these perceptions. There is also recognition from all stakeholders that the traditional once-off type trainings that are offered by international actors have not been effective. And yet, the most common proposed solution in our workshops was that more capacity strengthening is the solution. So that draws the question, like, what is the way forward? Because there is a clear frustration among local national NGOs about never feeling that they are fully capacitated and saying that it's a school that you can never graduate from. Next slide, please. So some of the data from our quantitative survey highlighted some issues that I think are quite relevant. The first chart builds on the point of the different perceptions, where local and national NGOs were asked to provide the capacities that they would like to strengthen. And number 1 was fundraising, and number 2 was governance and organizational development. Whereas throughout the interviews that we conducted, local national NGOs told us that the most of the capacity strengthening trainings or any methodology they received was on technical capacities. So there's a clear mismatch between what's been offered and what is being desired. So one solution that's been put forward is capacity sharing, and again, is not a new concept, but we saw little evidence of this approach being adopted. We found very few international actors recognize that they have much to learn from local partners, and even less organizations that had adopted this as an institutional approach. And we believe that this point ties back to equitable partnership and risk sharing. It requires a certain level of humility from international actors and an openness to change how they have been working. Lastly, the research found that the expectation for local and national NGOs work in French or English is an overlooked capacity barrier. This is quite context specific and is not a barrier for all NGOs. However, the global survey results show that it is a barrier for 1 in 3 organizations, and therefore we believe that it merits more attention. Next slide, please. So the last finding is in some way similar to the previous one, as it is a challenge that's been faced by local and national NGOs for many decades, and it's about retaining staff. And it's something that we felt that still needed to be highlighted because it remains an impediment to localization. If local and national NGOs cannot retain staff, it is inconceivable that they will be in a position to lead on humanitarian responses. And in the current system, where people move to better their conditions and career, it's going to continue. And this affects all organizations, but there's no doubt that the local actors are at the bottom of this food chain. And until this is addressed, it's going to remain a challenge. So the chart shows that there are factors that, and this is from the quantitative survey, that would make staff stay with their organization. And the top 2 are mission and mandate and supporting your community, suggesting that if there were solutions to the imbalance in conditions, a lot of staff would actually prefer to stay with their organization. There were some suggestions from stakeholders to harmonize salary scales among all actors for certain positions, but no evidence of this actually being put into action. The Charter for Change signatories commit to not recruiting from partner organizations in humanitarian crises, and the START network have put forward ethical recruitment guidelines. However, it seems it will take a much more systems-wide approach for there to be real change on this issue. Next slide, please. So now that's the end of the presentation on the findings. I'm going to hand over to our colleagues to give some insights from their context, and beginning with Mala from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. That is really thought-provoking. And then, it's been almost 2 years I've been working with this project, and every time I'm having same kind of feeling that there are a lot to discuss and a lot to share about. So I will not go into the very much detailed research findings. I know that the research report are available on the website, but some very basic insight from our work. Especially for, we are advocating for it's been more than 8 years that we many of us are committed for the grand bargain, and is so unfortunate that after 8 years, even though the larger funder grand bargain and the Charter for Change committed to shift 25% of their funding to the local actor, the localization agenda has made only very small progress. So I can share one of our findings, from the evidence reflected in the research conducted by the Shared Trust in November 2022, that shows that less than 1% of the 187 billion of the total official development assistance, which is ODA, in 2018 went directly to the local development organization. And in 2021, only 0.4% of the all humanitarian aid went directly to the local and national organizations. So this is very unfortunate scenario that we are still with a very lower progress. I think from that point of view, we need to make sure that the commitment we made for the grand bargain, for the Charter for Change, we make substantial effort to make sure that this is implemented and we have clear protocol on it. So while we are having a conversation about shifting power from to the local organization, I think it is also very important to realize or recognize that local organizations are heterogeneous, they are not homogeneous. So, and we also need to understand the power dynamics that exist within the local organizations. So, shifting power only from the INGOs to the local organization might not be a being the localization until we ensure we address the power dynamics that exist in the ecosystem, because we want at the end our main agenda should be whether we are able to listen to the community. If a big NGO, big local organizations are also isolated from the community, is this something we are looking for? Definitely not. Then how can we address those power dynamics? How can we bring community people in the decision making? That should be our one of the major priority. And for this, we need to realize the power dynamics, and also and in this discussion, I don't want to exclude anybody from the effort just because they belongs to the UN agency, just because they belongs to the INGOs. How can we bring a very respectful environment? We can create a enabling environment where all of us can contribute from of our different perspective, different knowledge, and we can serve better to the affected community. That should be our main priority. Irrespective of who is working for where. I'm really, sometimes I feel so overwhelmed when I say that how we divide people from global south, global north. I think we need to come together, all of us, to find a proper solution to address the different challenges we are having at that moment, especially at the humanitarian sector. And particularly during when we're talking about localization, I think substantial effort should be given to the organizations. Those are small and medium scale size organizations, because during our research project, what I have experienced that many people, if you ask them a question, are are you sending your fund directly to the local organization? They will say yes. And if you ask them to name them, they will be always telling you the big name from the local context. So it should not be like the big name. How can we incorporate small and medium scale organization, particularly organizations that works for the marginalized groups, socially excluded group like women and different sexual orientation groups, people with disability? How can we provide more fund to them is very one of the core component. I think it should be highly considered. And for the capacity, yeah, I think it's one of the most popular jargon I have been hearing for the since I'm in the sector. I think capacity, it's not only requirement for the local organization. I think it's requirement for all of us. Local organization, national organization might need to learn something about their system, but we from the other end, how can we improve our understanding on localization? How can we improve our facilitation skill? The kind of role now we are expecting at the international organization, UN agency, or at the donor agency. How can improve our system, improve our understanding, improve our partnership modality? I think the capacity building requirement is applicable for all, not only for the local and national organizations. And for local national organizations, sometimes I think we bypass some of the very basic question on their integrity, just in the name of capacity. Sometimes I just feel this, is it about the capacity or is it about the integrity? Because from Bangladesh point of view, I can say that we have many big organizations. Those are very good on the microfinance program. And for those microfinance programs, they often do not have big training, capacity building training for doing those microfinance. They are doing absolutely good with the microfinance program. But when an organization went to them for a development program, they often bring the issues of like capacity gap for their misconduct. So I often ask myself that is it a capacity like gap of in the capacity, or is it a question about the integrity? Unless we have those integrity in place, better system in place, our commitment for the community, how can we incorporate all those voices in the design, and how can we have a very respectful environment, like without excluding any of the stakeholder from the conversation, I think is very important for us. So yeah, like I'm not going into the details that we are still not sharing ICR, like there are lack of funding, lack of flexibility. I think all those findings are written very like in a comprehensive manner in our report, requesting all of you to have a look into it and share your thoughts and feedback with us. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mala. Yusuf, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So when we talk about northwest of Syria, we talk about internal armed conflict, and this adds to the issues of the crisis inside Syria. And we talk also about cross-borders activities where NGOs, I mean Syrian NGOs working for Syria, for northwest of Syria, they are based in Turkey. So, I mean, just imagine that's the two factors: internal conflict and also cross-borders activities where we have headquarters of these organizations, local organizations in Turkey, and they have offices inside Syria. Mark just started talking about trust, and the trust is a main issue and factor in Syria, not only between international actors and local actors, but all local actors between each other, because different loyalties, they have different engagement with this party or that party, etc. So trust is a main issue. And when we talk about a very important point also inside Syria and similar to other contexts, maybe we have few local or national organizations. They are strong, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 organizations. They have partnerships with international actors, both international NGOs and donors, and then others, they are left behind. And this is also a tension. There's a tension between national NGOs or local NGOs sometimes and other actors. So this is a very important factors in terms of delay of localization. Why? Because just we are focusing as international actors on few number of organizations, but also even these very strong organizations, whenever they suffer from a specific issue or factor, we find them, they can do nothing. So resilience is close to zero. And when we talk about localization and when they have just a sudden decision by donor or international organizations, for instance, and then immediately they give notice to their staff, and then they stop operations inside Syria, northwest of Syria. And this happened, unfortunately, where hundreds of people just because of a trust. And here again, I mean, trust between international actors and local actors, where they immediately made the decision to stop everything by email or fax, and that's it. So imagine, I mean, the level of fragility of localization in such a context, for instance. And this is related also to trust, because all these factors are related to each other. A very important point, maybe in the Syrian context, we can see when it comes to capacity of local staff or local organizations. At individual levels, we find really good. This is why we see Syrian humanitarian workers. You can see them now today in Sudan. There are many in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Libya, etc. As individuals, they are really good. So they have capacity. But when it comes to institutional level, maybe they are not strong enough to continue whenever they face any threat from, for instance, any threat from international actors, or simply in the context itself. In terms of risks, and this was also mentioned, and related to trust again, internal conflict, and also we have headquarters of strong national and local Syrian organizations in Turkey, and then they have offices inside Syria. Here, the risk, I mean, the way international organizations deal with the local actors, very cautious, Sometimes just simple things, in case they happen, they stop everything instead of just taking enough time to investigate, to talk about this, and just leave things going on. So this is a very important factor as well. In terms of the staff, I just give a quote from one of our respondents inside Syria. They said, one staff salary we can will cover operational cost of our school the whole year. So imagine the way they mention. Why is that? I mean, these are huge salaries, and for one staff inside in Turkey, for instance, and we are deprived from operational cost because you know that education sector inside Syria, needs, they are not met in a good way, we can say. So maybe these are the most important points from the Syrian context. Trust, a very important factor, and role, internal conflict, and also cross-borders activities. And this is related to risks and also capacity development. It was mentioned also as a quote from one of the Syrian respondents when they say, this is a school where we never graduate. We need to be even teacher. We need to move to another area where we don't need these types of repeated every year. They have the same types of training. We need to have something different. We need to have something that's strategic level, for instance, how to manage our organizations when we don't have enough funding, or how we can raise funding internally, etc. This is also a very important point. So these are just a few examples from the Syrian context where slow down localization. And also this morning, one of the CEO of or country director of a local NGO, they said we need to arrange for a webinar where we invite UN staff and international staff, and we need to educate them how to understand our culture, how to understand our needs, because so far they think that they are just teaching us, but we have something to teach them. They need to learn them. We need to evaluate our international partners, not only just due diligence, for instance, from their side to tell us you are qualified to be a partner or not, but we need to inform them that if they are good or not when they work with us as an international partner. We don't have this so far, and we don't have also a baseline for localization in Syria. We cannot say that where we are today, because we don't, in the future, is there any progress? We don't know, because simply we don't have indicators to measure the current situation. And then after that, 1 year later or 2 years later, just to inform our international partners if there's a progress or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuf. So I'll hand over to Noordin.
Yes, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I think there's an issue with my microphone, but Mark, please let me know if my voice is a bit low or not.
Yeah, it's okay, but just try and keep it as close as possible. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure, Mark. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm happy to be here today, joining you for this session. Just to be quick, we know that localization is more about shifting power and resources closer to communities. But in Somalia, this is not that simple.
Sorry, Noordin, you're gonna have to lift it up.
Okay, Mark. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. So several of the research findings highlight important dynamics in the case of Somalia. Firstly, we must recognize the power imbalances within the local NGO landscapes. Somalia's diverse ecosystems of local and national NGOs is marked by stark differences in size and influences. Large national NGOs connected to international funding sources hold significant power, while smaller locally based NGOs, especially those in hard-to-reach areas, struggle to gain any tractions in the humanitarian systems. These imbalances are further complicated by the political dynamics and clan affiliations that shape the humanitarian responses across the country and across the political spectrum of Somalia. In areas like Baidabo, where we did our focus group discussions, for example, a few major NGOs received the bulk of the available funding, often sidelining smaller, much more closer to the communities, CPO-based organizations. This creates a pattern where the larger, better resource organizations attend coordination meetings, make international connections, and attract funding. Meanwhile, smaller NGOs, often representing minority groups in remote areas, are left behind, unable to access the system or advocate for the communities they serve. The result is a cycle of power imbalances that international actors must be cautious not to reinforce. A troubling observation from stakeholders is the risk of replicating the gatekeeping behavior seen at the international level, only this time at the national level. While international organizations and donors seek to empower local and national NGOs, their efforts might inadvertently favor the larger players in Somalia, perpetuating the very power structures that localization agenda aims to dismantle, which Mark also spoke about when he was talking about the oligopoly structures that were rising across. There are some promising initiatives. For example, one donor insisted that consortiums at least one minority group organizations, but unfortunately, this and other cases is one exception driven by one individual rather than a systemic organizational commitment. Without such an approach becoming institutionalized, the risks remain high, and smaller NGOs will continue to be excluded from critical opportunities, which they all continuously mention across the key informative interviews that we held and across the workshops that we conducted. Some stakeholders have suggested that larger NGOs should help build the capacity of smaller ones, but even this has faced obstacles. Political alliances and internal complexities often prevent larger organizations from playing this role effectively. One consortium manager shared that the political environment can impede initiatives designed to help smaller NGOs graduate to levels where they can receive direct funding. Furthermore, given the ongoing state of emergency in Somalia's humanitarian responses, it's understandable why international actors may sometimes tend to rely on larger NGOs, those that are ready to respond immediately because of the shocks and price shocks that continuously pop up across the country. However, if international actors are serious about localization and if the donors are serious, they must hold intermediary organizations accountable for genuinely fostering the growth of smaller NGOs. Otherwise, the current disparities will only deepen and become much further. Finally, one critical issue raised by stakeholders is the need to shift donor mindsets. Compliance requirements are often too stringent and that only the larger, more established NGOs can meet them. This in turn allows these organizations to maintain their grip on power while smaller NGOs are excluded. A shift in thinking is necessary where flexibility in compliance would allow for a more inclusive approach to funding. So I think I covered a couple of issues in relation to power dynamics and structures across the country. And I will just keep it at there, but thank you. And if you have any questions, I will be available for the Q&A session. Back to you, team. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuruddin. And so then I'll hand over to Herbert from Malawi.
Thank you so much. So just to talk a bit about the Malawi context in terms of the research findings, I will start with some brief quote about some of the perceptions that we found. So one of the international actors, for example, indicated that, you know, in cases of emergency, it becomes a question of life and death. So the stakes are high, you cannot take the risk. And then at the same time, you also had local actors saying that, you know what, you cannot expect someone who is coming here only for 5 days and doing research and consulting a few people that they understand the context or the Malawian perspective. And that is just to show or to highlight the fact that we still have those perceptions of capacity, that on one hand, it is perceived that, you know, local and national actors may not have all the capacity that is required to deliver on humanitarian work. And so there's need for as much intervention as possible from international actors. But that does not mean that efforts are not underway towards realizing the grand bargain. So there are certain examples that I just want to highlight. For instance, there is a platform created by CARE. CARE has been championing what is called the Humanitarian Partnership Platform, which is a mobilization of local organizations that are working in specific regions which are highly prone to disasters, especially cyclones and flooding. And so this platform brings together those organizations and they have a steering committee. And so the resources are channeled to that particular platform and the members of the platform for them to deliver on humanitarian work in times of emergencies. And that is perceived to be one of it's an example of risk sharing, but also ensuring that we deliver as much as possible towards the end goal of localization, as highlighted in the background presentation. So we looked at that as one of the case studies, and it is there on the website. I will also highlight the fact that in terms of the national frameworks, the regulatory framework, there's been an effort to also empower or to make sure that there is support for the localization agenda. And so government has been enacting a legal framework that tries to define or facilitate or stimulate partnership between local and international actors. And it makes that particular instrument makes reference to ensuring that a specific percentage of resources goes towards project implementation, or in other ways, it goes to the local actors as much as possible. The third element is also the fact that within the local actors, especially NGOs and those that like CBOs, there is a forum that is called the Local NGO Forum, and that forum provides space for capacity sharing and also ensuring that there is the sharing of risks and enhancing, obviously, issues of trust, so that if one organization has capacity in certain elements, be it governance or resource mobilization and fundraising, then it is able to pull up the other organizations that may not have as much capacity as the others. So much so that even the consortium approach, which is currently dominated by partnership between international and local, it can also be championed among local organizations themselves, so that they can share their different capacities and still be able to demonstrate that they are able to manage resources, which is perceived to be the highest risk by international actors and to some extent donors as well. So these are just some of the efforts because of the understanding that, you know what, we have to do something as a country. We have to move in the direction where resources and efforts are channeled as local as possible. And these are just some of the mechanisms that are there to make sure that this agenda is realized. So I will stop there for now to highlight the Malawian case. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Yusuf. So I think just before we move to the Q&A, I was just going to introduce very quickly the tools that we have developed, and then we can move to the questions and answers. So we just have a couple of tools here. So there's two main tools, the first being the Trust and Partnership Tracker, and the second is the Locally Led Funding Tracker, which is a tool that includes two sub-tools, which is sometimes difficult to explain over PowerPoint, and I think you have to maybe look on the website to really get it, but if we can maybe move on to the next slide, and I'll explain each one. So the first is about trust, and we established in the presentation that trust is fundamental for the success in partnerships, and the tracker is designed to be used by all actors in partnership to measure and track this. Firstly, it can be used as a self-reflection tool, meaning that it can be used internally within an organization or a team to track the actions and of your team and improve on performance. However, to be more effective, we believe it should be used in partnership, where, as well as a self-reflection, there is a 360 style mutual assessment. We believe that this can be used to strengthen partnerships. And lastly, if donors agree with us that this is a fundamental, that they could require partners to use this tool and report on it. However, at present, it's designed to be used in a qualitative way and not aimed to provide a score. However, we believe after testing and piloting that maybe that could be the next step. Next slide, please. So the second main tool is the Locally Led Funding Tracker, and this aims to track both the quantity and quality of funding. And the quality has two aspects, that of the quality of funding for the local and national NGOs and the level of local leadership taken from communities. The next slide, please. So the the Locally Led Action Tool, this tracks various components of local leadership, and we have taken influence and leadership, taken influence from USAID's indicators on locally led development. to adapt and put into this tool, and to put a system of scoring local leadership. Next slide, please. And the last one is the sub tool, which is a quality of funding tool, and this includes components such as length of grant, ICR overhead support, involvement in decision making, flexibility, and capacity support. The data of these combined tools would then feed into the first locally led funding tracker tool, and it's envisioned that this could be used by donors in country, or it could be used by bodies such as localization working groups, local NGO forum, such as the one that Herbert mentioned, and it could be used as a way to establish a baseline of the effect that the funding is having on localization, and can be disaggregated per type of funding or per actor. And just the final point is that the two sub-tools, the quality of funding tool and local leadership tool, they can be used independently and could be used by any organization to track their own performance or that of their partner on any of these issues. But I invite you to check them on the website and to learn a bit more. And we are in the process of doing some validation exercises with and some piloting workshops in Somalia and DRC in the coming week or so. So we believe that these will be constantly updated, and we hope and invite others to join us in experimenting and testing them out. So that's the end of the presentation, I think. Yes, and lastly, this is the website. So I believe that's a QR code. If you have your phones, you can go directly to it that way, or also Ariana is putting the link into the webinar chat. But I think that's it for me now, and I'll hand over to Ariana for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mark. So we've already had some wonderful questions put in the Q&A box, as well as some questions submitted in the pre-registration. So I want to try to get to as many of those as possible. But please, we will not be taking raised hands. So if you have anything that you want to contribute, you can use the Q&A button that's at the base of your screen. These questions are incredibly important to us as we continue this conversation. This is not the first conversation we have, nor do we hope it is the last. So your input is really important to how this conversation continues to grow. So what I'll do is I'll pick some questions to highlight, and we'll have our responses from our incredible partners and our insights from the research as we can. If we don't get to yours, I'm so sorry. So as Mark discussed, the research had kind of three key pillars: finance, capacity, or human resources, and power in partnership. So I want to try to group the questions together on that basis. So we're going to start with finance. So I wanted to highlight here the question by, and I apologize for any mispronunciations, Katarina Hamed. I'm adding this to the answer live. Thank you for the presentation. Could you also touch on what the research had to say about overhead, or ICR, to local actors, and how this influences their sustainability? I'm wondering, I would love to just open it up to our entire panelist crew, if anyone would like to speak on that point. And I know we have some results from Mark as well.
Okay, but perhaps I can kick off while the others are still thinking. Yes, we did. ICR was a very common theme throughout the research. It didn't quite make it into like one of the 8 key findings, because within certain of the others it makes sense. But we think it's a really key component of the equitable partnership finding, that ICR, the fair sharing of ICR is an absolute requirement if you want to have equitable partnership. So, I mean, we also have data from our global survey, where we asked the local and national NGOs, do you receive a fair share of ICR? And we also asked the INGOs, are you sharing ICR fairly? And the results were kind of inverse, with about, I think, 60% of INGOs saying that they were, and only 30% saying of local and national NGOs saying that they were receiving it. So there is a bit of a disconnect there between the perceptions and what's happening. However, I think during the course of this research, what we have found is that a lot of INGOs have now either established and released policies or have committed to doing so. So there does seem to be change happening. It's not happening at the pace that I think the local and national NGOs want. And I think that the real test is going to be if those policies actually happen and if the practice actually follows. So I think that's something that will need to be tracked going forward.
Thank you so much, Mark. Mala, would you like to follow?
Just one line. So when so in Bangladesh, we conducted interview with a local, national, and international organization. When we asked our international colleague that what are the limitations you have to sharing your ICR with a local partner, and substantial number of the participants, they raised that they even didn't receive equitable ICR from their global office, their head office. So I think there should be some effort regarding the ICR sharing. As Mark has mentioned correctly, that many of the organizations still do not have any policy around ICR. Sometimes those are very not like institutionalized. Some efforts are made only very much project based. For example, like some partners are, some partners are part of the Start Fund Bangladesh. So only for the Start Fund project, they share ICR with their partner, but this practice is not common for all of their project or all of their program across the organizations. So there are if they have policy, if they institutionalize those system within their system, including their head office and their subcontracting partner, local partner, then only then it is possible. And I'm sorry for the use of my language, like the subcontracting. I think we should always treat all of our stakeholders as an equal partner. An equal share of resources should be well discussed, and then percentage should be decided by the conversation, not someone is should not be top down.
Go ahead, Herbert.
Yes, please. Yeah, just to add to the point made by Mala and Mark, to say that much of the reason why we do not see a lot of ICR going towards local partners, for at least in the context of Malawi, by international partners, is because of the the donor policy, so to speak, the back donor or the HQs of those organizations. If it is required, then it will trickle down. But if it is not required, then they have no compelling reason or incentive to share ICR equitably with local partners. But it is not that they do not understand or they do not realize the importance of doing so, but I guess it's in the context of how much do they also need to operate their offices at local level within the country offices. So because of that, it has to be a requirement from the back donor or the HQ that, you know what, in the interest of our commitment to the grand bargain and localization, ensure that there is also an allocation, an equitable allocation to local partners. As long as that is not there, that's why we don't see much happening, especially in the local context. Thank you.
Over to you, Yusuf.
Yeah, thank you very much. Same in Syria. I mean, some organizations, they receive some, they don't receive, or they receive small percentage. And here we can say that here's a gap, and also sometimes misbehavior of many organizations, for instance, just to save some money. When it comes to salary or wages, the workers, they sign that they receive this amount, but in reality, they receive less than that. For organizations just to survive, sometimes there's gap between different projects, and they need to keep their staff, etc. But here I would like maybe to highlight a very important gap in the grand bargain. Organizations, when they don't have enough money reserve from these grants, will not be sustainable, will not be able to sustain at all. So as donors, when you give them money, you need to spend this way. and they don't have anything for endowment, for instance, so they can deal with emergency cases, or they can deal with situations where they don't have access to fund for needs assessment, for instance, or to keep their staff working after the projects come to an end. There's a gap here, and it should be dealt with. It is not enough just to have direct access to fund, or funding or grants from donors, but you need to give them a margin, maybe we can say, freedom to deal with these situations. And there are some organizations, local organizations, sometimes it is not good behavior for sure, but they don't have any other choice but just to go through this one. And sometimes they said it is the only way we have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I want to move on to our next question in the interest of time. So here's another one that's a little bit about finance. As we saw, the 25% direct is not necessarily happening at the rate that everyone had hoped. And so most local actors receive funding through partnership. We received a question from a local actor about, how can local organizations find partnerships? And also, related and unrelated, how can local organizations find more calls and financial opportunities that have fewer administrative requirements? So how can they find opportunities that are best suited to their organizational size and needs? I know that this can be very contextual in response, but maybe if there's some best practice or ideas in your context where things were able to be smoothed.
Maybe here I raise one point, not only related to 25%, but the point is that who is getting this 25%, one organization or two organizations? In the context in Syria, for instance, we find just very few organizations have access to direct fund from institutional donors, for instance. So it is not only the percentage, but how this percentage is divided or allocated to different organizations. In case of northwest of Syria, it is not balanced, and just a few organizations enjoying direct access, and others, they don't have access at all. Thank you.
I think, yeah, just I guess to answer the question about how do local organizations who are not necessarily tapped into the humanitarian coordination system in the way that their counterparts are, how do they actually access the information and organizations that they'll partner with? And I think what we found across the context was where there was an organized local NGO forum or consortium that was really helping to reach out to, or helping the local organizations who are part of it to make that link with some of the international actors. And I think that was especially, we saw in DRC that a platform of local NGOs, which is now unified, is now getting a lot of attention from the senior or the humanitarian country team. Now, I think the next step will be to make sure that all of the local NGOs who are part of that have the same access. But I think organizing collectively is definitely one way to ensure that information can be shared. And it's something that the local NGOs can start to do themselves. On the other side of it, what we also found is that a lot of donor agencies, they found it hard to meet local NGOs that don't have offices in the capital city of their context that they're in. And I think maybe this is something for donor agencies to reflect on, but why is it that they only have to be based in the capital city? And we have a good example from the Swiss Development Corporation, who actually set up their office in Bukavu, in South Kivu, in Democratic Republic of Congo. And that's enabled their representatives to have personal relationships with the local organizations that they're funding. And that was seen as a real, something very different and unique. And the benefits of that are obvious. So, I'll hand over to, I think, Mala.
I agree with what you and Yusuf has shared, and I think that donor has much to do. They really need to come up with very streamlined due diligence process. unless we have the streamlined due diligence process that local organizations, especially small and medium-sized organizations, comply with, I don't think that any of our cooperation might bring substantial change until the donor is not ready. Because we often very much focus on the risk factor, but we do not consider that when people are dying, they're starving out of food as a risk. So how we are defining our risks, and how in the name of like financial misconduct, you cannot just deny giving resources to the small to medium scale organizations. Those are best positioned to respond very rapidly and within a very minimal operational capacity, like operational financial resources. So that kind of system change is very much needed.
I would love to jump in and build on that, Mala. Actually, we had a couple very interesting questions in the chat about risk itself, about the difference of risk definitions, as well as the responsibility of donors and international actors to share risk with local partners. I was wondering if the panel could share either some examples of where risk was able to be shared or some different approaches to how international actors can start to carry more of the load and be more understanding in their requirements.
I can give you an example. In Bangladesh, under the program of Local Coalition Accelerator, which is an initiative of the Shared Trust, the US-based organization, and Warranty Advisory Center, which is a CSO based in Kenya. So under this particular program, there are coalition in different countries, countries like Bangladesh, Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia. We have multiple coalitions. So my learning working with the coalition is it's a coalition of 16 local organizations, where 4 are citizen NGOs and 12 are community-based organizations. From the beginning of this coalition, they have set up their own constitutions by themselves. And within these constitutions, all kind of like operational mechanism, their transparency protocol, their accountability procedure are inbuilt in the coalition, and like how they will be listening to the community, how they will be developing their ideas for a project, like inclusive, transparent accountability mechanism are inbuilt here. I found when they sit together, when there are, inclusive methodology, when you are accountable, like the mutual accountability mechanism are there, like it's not about the accountability only to the donors, you are also accountable to the community. So when the system is in place, you can share your risks with your partner. And also you can always in a participatory design method, you bring different ideas to minimize your risks, and also part of your accountability and transparency also secured in that way. Is there any probing question? I make it very short.
I don't think
No,
we
I
have
think
any.
no, I think I was just going to say just that if people want to learn more about the case that Mala was talking about, we do have a case study on that on the website. So just giving that another plug on our website, we have several case studies. So check that out, because Mala wrote a very great description of that Shared Trust Local Coalition Accelerator.
Any other final comments on risk before we shift?
Well, from me, this is perhaps just to say that this is where trust and risk work hand in hand. There has to be a level of trust for you to be able to believe in risk sharing and trust institutions or local organizations with some level of responsibility and accountability. And that's why I think where you have consortia being built out of an initiative of local entities and institutions, because you know and you are sure there will be some kind of peer learning from each other, and in the course they would be able to build skills that they may not have as individual entities and institutions. And that is one way in which risk can be shared but it has to be deliberate. It needs to be stimulated. It needs to be encouraged, rather than to wait until when you are sure that, you know, there will be completely no risk if I transfer resources to this one. There has to be some trust built in organizations for you to even start sharing the risk. And this is something that we are all saying in this research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And over to you, Yusuf.
Yeah, and I think there's a question about trust, how to improve or build the trust between international actors and local actors, and this is related to risk as well. So we can say the first stage is just they need to sit with each other, they need to be honest with each other about all types of risks faced by local actors, especially when we talk about internal conflict. Always internal conflict, much more difficult than natural disasters, for instance. So if they sit with each other and be honest with each other, then accept also mistakes from the local actors, because there are many risks they are out of our control as local actors. So in case they don't trust local actors and they don't accept mistakes and they don't they don't punish the whole organization when there is any mistake or any misbehavior by any of their staff. Similar to the international organizations, whenever there's any risk, I mean, related to, or any fraud, for instance, related to just to one person or two-person staff, I mean, those people are punished. But in case of local actors, the local actors as a whole is punished, and then immediate actions are taken by local actors. So they need to be honest with each other first. They need to understand types of risk we face as local actors. In case they don't understand these risks, they will not be able to deal with. They need to put themselves in our shoes just to understand all types of risk we face. When we talk about the field, about operations, about different actors who are really sources of risks, and then I think they can understand the situation and they can accept some risks and some mistakes as well. But unfortunately, and this is what happens sometimes with many organizations, because we as trust consultancy, we have also third-party monitoring services. So they hesitate to be honest sometimes with us, because any data, any information they give us, this will affect the grants. They will affect their relations with the international partners, if it is an NGO or if it is UN agency or donors. And this is very, very true. I mean, from the work we have, they fear of these things. So that donors, international actors, they need to trust their partner. They need to be honest. They need to accept mistakes. They need to support local actors to overcome these mistakes, again, or risks, because they are out of their controls.
Thank you so much. And once again, it ties brilliantly into the next question I want to bring up, which is about what has the research shown us in how international actors can build trust at the local level for the purpose of mitigating risk, for the purpose of more effective response. Any particular examples that the panel wants to share on this, on how trust is actively built?
Okay, I'll just start off while others are still thinking. Again, I think, I mean, again, maybe I'll just go back to the tool that we created and the reason we did it. I think that what we found across the 5 contexts, that there wasn't enough tangible efforts to focus on the building of trust with local actors. A lot of good practices are in place, and trust is kind of being built as a consequence of that, but it's not really been focused on as an issue. And that was the justification for us to really focus on it and to see, okay, we think that this is something that when you're entering into a partnership with an organization, as much as trying to focus on your program indicators, your budget, all of the things that you do anyway, why not create the space to actually track the components and categories of trust that have been well established with you and your partner to try to improve on your actions and have a stronger partnership. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't really answer like what are the good examples, because I think the reason we did it was that we didn't find any kind of really brilliant ones that I have to mind at the moment. But I don't know if any of the colleagues want to give examples.
Like the example I just shared about the local coalition accelerator, yeah, I think like the shared power, mutual trust, mutual accountability, mutual responsibility, all those are very key component for building a trustworthy relationship. So when you have like very established system that ensure that people are respected, people are accountable, people are transparent, there are very good way of information flowing. Information is a very important component. So where you are transparent with all of your decision making, whether you are part of the decision making. So these are the more very much important component for building trust, you know. And for the donor and then for the international agency, I would rather like prefer, like my suggestion is to build your listening ability, listen your partner, and facilitate the environment in a very respectful way, like without having any kind of sort of power domination. So if Yusuf or Noor,
Yeah, I can
whoever you want
I
to add
can
anything.
add first donors, international actors, they should be close to local actors. How they can be close? They need to communicate regularly. They need to share information. They need to accept mistakes. They need to support local actors to define risks and to how to overcome them. I give you an example from our work as well. We had a third-party monitoring project, and the international actors, we suggested them to share data collection tools with the local actor. They refused, and they said, in case they know these questions, maybe they manipulate when you conduct interviews with them. So imagine such a partnership. I mean, it is very bad. I was surprised to hear this from an international partner talking about the local partner. How you give them money? They spend money. If they would like to manipulate, they can manipulate. And how can you build the trust with those people? You need also to build the trust. You need to accept negative findings. You need to accept failure. If you don't accept failure, I will try to hide my mistakes. I will try to hide, etc. And no trust with you. So I need to when they sign, for instance, their staff workers, they receive 500, and reality they receive and the reality they receive 400, 300. I mean, no trust with you because they have something they need to overcome, and they cannot, and they don't give them solution. You need to give them solution. How can I help you to avoid this? Just give me this, short amount, small amount of money to survive for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. As a donor or international actor, you need to help me to overcome this. Otherwise, I will misbehave, and then trust will be there. Trust will not be there at all. So you need to understand their problems. You need to accept solutions related to the community because they don't have any other solutions. They cannot raise funding, for instance, from local communities. How can they resolve these things? You need to support them to find solutions. But the issue is that you understand this is a problem and I cannot help you. I will give you just 6-month project, and what after that you need to apply again, and it will take many months. How can I cover this? My staff is there, already trained them, and then they will leave because they need to live. They need to find another job, etc. And you cannot help me if you don't help me as a donor. If you don't help me as an international actors, it will be like this. There are many mistakes from my side, and sometimes you know it as a donor. You know this is done, and this is not. Not compliant or
Sorry,
no
Yusuf,
compliant.
just in the interest of time, we might try to. I think that the point's been well taken. We'll just try. There's a few more questions I think Ariana wants to get to. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And just to say that this is a really important one, as trust is both about relationships and about operations. And I think that really came through in the share. So thank you so much. I want to shift now to capacity. We have a lot of really good questions about capacity. But just to start at the beginning, who decides what the definition of capacity is? And why does it remain so challenging, right? Why do we continue to not find the answer to the capacity question? And one example given by Anwar Mohammed was that fundraising is a key ask from LNGOs, as shown in the research, but is frequently not delivered as a capacity strengthening training or resource by donors or partners. Over to the panel for thoughts about the definition of capacity and what capacities are seen as as priority in as far as capacity strengthening is concerned?
I think the definition of capacity building is very much one-sided. As I mentioned in my previous, that capacity building is the core requirement for all the stakeholders from the different aspect, but we are only focusing on that like the local organization, they don't have capacity, but we often do not recognize the capacity they have. So this is one of the component, and during the presentation made by Mark, he clearly mentioned that how many of our capacity building initiatives are very much top down, like we do not actually conduct need assessment with the local organization. So I think this has to be tailor-made program based on the need coming from the local and national organization. At the same time, we also need to do like the need assessment with the international and UN agency and donor agency. So a holistic mapping is required for all stakeholders to create an enabling environment for it. And there are some, like, as I mentioned, that the one-sided capacity. For example, English is not our first language. And it is also not true that I don't have capacity. I would rather say that I have like more capacity because I can at least speak 2 different language. But who is telling me they don't have capacity, they only can speak 1 language. So I think those perspective is also needed. And these are very much interconnected with the system change. Why we need to provide our proposal, our report in English, like why do not have those system in place where like countries, like organization from different countries can produce their own report and then their own proposal in their own language. Why don't we have those system in build? So it's not about the question of capacity gap. I think it's about the gap in the system, because I cannot speak English and you cannot speak Bengali. So the gap is applicable for both ends. And what would be the middle ground? We need to find out the middle ground.
Yeah, so added to that, I think the question is who should define capacity. So all actors need capacity one way or the other. And it is the responsibility of each actor to do an introspection of where is my gap, where do I need, and what capacity do I need for me to deliver. And so the problem, as Mala has said, has been this top-down approach. But if we leave actors to reflect on their own capacities, we will realize that actually there is more that we are not tapping from, that we could use, that they could use in their own way, and we simply support what. And so the research has clearly shown the mismatch between what is delivered as capacity versus what is required and is perceived to be the need by different actors. So it has to be the responsibility of the respective actors to define what they need, and what capacity building should do is to meet those needs. Thank you.
Yes, just to follow up on Herbert and Ala's points, one of the key notes that one of the interviews we had in Somalia actually shared is that I'm sorry if you cannot hear me, but I'll just raise my voice. So one of the key issues that one of the key informants that we actually interviewed shared is that some of the capacity gaps that most donor communities and international agencies actually look forward to or focus on are mostly on soft capacity gaps that are across the organization. For example, training is on human resources, training is on policies, but the bottom-up approaches that are required for a capacity building and capacity strengthening for organizations, specifically for local actors, much more relates to institutional capacity buildings, because individuals that were trained across these sectors, across these individual scopes across the organization might actually lead the entity. But then the need is to actually have an organization that could handle or have or sustain that capacity structures across the entire programs it has. One key example in Somalia is Credo, where Concern was actually a lead organization helping Credo build throughout the years. And Credo is right now one of the biggest organizations across Somalia. So when we actually interviewed them, the key points they shared was not a focus on soft skills, but rather a focus on institutional capacity buildings. And just over to you, Ariana, or any other team member.
Thank you so much. I see that we're coming to the end of our time, so I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and then answer on kind of a big, perhaps somewhat philosophical question for us. So first, please, I'm sorry we didn't get to every question, but please also submit whatever questions you have now. We will look at them and work to answer them in how we disseminate this information as we go. The second thing is to say that we have in the chat the link to our website. We barely got to scratch the surface of all of the learnings that we've had from this project, as well as the incredible tools that we've designed as a group to try to address the challenges we see. So please go to that website and look at those resources. There's a detailed final report, individual country reports from all of our contexts, as well as those tools and case studies that help us see how we can move forward. So please take advantage of those resources. As well, this webinar will be available publicly afterwards. Please give us the chance to get it translated and available, so please stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for coming. So the final question, which I think is a very difficult one, but maybe we can share our reflections, is about what does a shift in power actually look like? How do we know that we've achieved a shift? And I think that's what a lot of people are wondering, you know, frustrations with the grand bargain progress. What does a shift in power actually look like? And I'll put it over to the panelists.
Hi, everyone. If I could actually start off with this one. So I think Mark actually spoke in the presentations about the dualistic of the two dimensions of localizations across our research. One in relation to a shift of power to local actors, and another to a shift of power and leadership to communities. And I think in this context, localization means moving decision-making authority, resources, and influence closer to the communities affected by crisis. That's either while strengthening the role of local actors, especially local and national government and community leaderships in leading humanitarian responses. So, and I think the key link here and the key phrase here is communities affected by crisis specifically. So if you want to have a shift in power, achieving this requires more than just financial resources. It's more about ensuring local actors have a seat at the table in critical decisions, equal access to opportunities, and capacity to operate independently across the humanitarian spectrum. So to my view, a good power, a shift power will look like more resource and authorities to communities affected by crisis. So, and I think if anyone from the team actually could interject here, but the tools that were developed, specifically those in relation to communities, affected populations in humanitarian crisis, answers these questions. So you should have individuals from these communities that could identify leadership roles in decision making, in resource allocations, and in the entire mechanisms that the humanitarian sector. Just that point, and anyone from the team could actually check here.
If I add to what Nordine said, when we talk about power shifting, this means that we shift decision-making from one side to another. And here we have international actors and we have local actors, and we have different types of local actors. I mean, those who will decide regarding these needs, these are our needs or priorities, and how to meet them in terms of modalities, timing, etc. So this is what we mean when we talk about to shift power. And here, what is interestingly, when we shift power from one international actors, donors or international NGO to another, to a local actor, could be national NGOs, this doesn't mean that we are shifting power to the community itself, because sometimes we replace one by another one who is far from the community, or there's a gap. And this is in the northwest of Syria, for instance. I heard one of the respondents, when I conducted interviews, he said, we need localization between our headquarters in Turkey and our office in Syria. So just not related to the international actor, but even between local actors, meaning that the community itself. So, and here you need to have indicators to measure how to shift this one from when we collect data from communities or beneficiaries, etc.
Thank you, Yusuf. Very shortly, Ariana, I rather prefer to call it as a shared power. When you call it shift power, it sounds like you are shifting power from here to here. That means you are creating another power structure. So how can we have a platform then structure where all of us can contribute, and all of us has better ways of doing, where we are very close to the community affected by the crisis, affected by the disaster. So this should be very much people-centric, community-centric, and which kind of how can we bring all those voices in the decision making is very important component for shared power.
Thank you all so much. And with that, I'd like to thank our incredible panelist team. And thank you all for joining us in the conversation today. We hope that this is the first of many conversations with you. Please contact us through the website, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks
Bye.
very much.
Have a nice day.